Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about Cyclops issue 1, written by Alex Packnadil, with art by Roge Antonio, with colours by Fer Cervantes, Zujo, and letters by Joe Caramanga. Scott Summers headlines his first solo series since 2014, and it opens with a bang as in an AIM facility in Romania, the villainous scientists blast Magic and Kid Omega with their prototype SR-302 gun, a weapon which temporarily alters the X gene. In this case, it makes both X-Men want to breathe sulfur dioxide, causing them both to writhe in pain and vomit up their guts. Luckily, the X-Men are saved by Cyclops, who blasts the AIM scientists. They could either try to overwhelm him, or they could just walk away with all of their teeth, but whatever happens, it will be their choice. Of course, the foolish scientists choose violence, and Cyclops doesn't back down, blasting the scientists, but their leader manages to grab him from behind, wanting to take him alive since he wants to cut Scott's eyes out for research. The AIM scientist knows his concussive blasts can generate enough force equal to that of a hydrogen bomb, but it's not much use unless someone is standing right in front of him. Scott begs to differ, focusing a single blast of his concussive beams onto a wall in front of him and ricocheting it around the room until it hits the scientist in the head, taking him down for the count. Man, this was a really fun, action-packed opening, and I'm really glad it was. I haven't looked at an X-Men book in a very long time, really since the Krakoa era. I looked a little bit at the Jed MacKay stuff and it never really interested me, especially after Krakoa. That was a hard act to follow, so I definitely feel for some of these writers who have to follow all of the amazing stuff that was happening in the Hickman Krakoa era. I was worried the series would rely too much on that big recent Age of Revelation event that was going on for the last couple of months, an event I never actually glanced at, but so far it doesn't really seem to be picking up from that event. I'm sure there's going to be things from that event that are referenced in this book, but I like that so far it's pretty reader or returning reader friendly. I know all who these characters are, what's going on, so I can't ask for more than that. Scott, while saving the team, isn't happy since Magic and Kid Omega were told to wait until the team were fully in position. Juggernaut and Beast bash in through the wall, a little late to the party as well, as Magic apologizes for getting carried away, but Scott says he is mad since he doesn't want apologies, he wants soldiers. So this is the shades of the Scott I didn't really like or care for all that much in the wake of Krakoa and in those post-Krakoa books where he was kind of hardline into war and making the X-Men a bit more militaristic. I get where his character was going post-Krakoa and like it was heading in that direction, but it was far from what I liked about the Krakoa era, which was the more heroic, hopeful superhero Scott Summers of that era. Later at the X-Men HQ, Beast questions Scott's choice of words about them being soldiers, citing how they never were soldiers, they were Xavier's students. Scott thinks that Xavier was making them into soldiers, and they always have been that. He wants to know what Beast needs, and Hank tells him about Chief Robbins coming by with a letter, wanting to remind Scott that the Merle police are not his message bank. Scott looks over the note that Chief Robbins gave Beast, finding that he needs to go visit some old ghosts, as the note is from Dr. Robin Hanover, along with her number. I know Beast eventually did rectify his Krakoa era ways, but it's so funny seeing him being the one to begin to question Scott about what he's doing with the X-Men and making them more soldiers, and kind of questions like, hey, this is kind of morally grey, like what we're doing is kind of wrong. It's really funny because there was a time a couple of years ago where Beast would be hard on into that and love the idea of that. I don't want people to think I'm disliking this, I'm not, and I'm interested to see where Packnadil is going to go with this whole militaristic Scott idea, since he writes morally grey characters really well, since he gets deep into them and explores their character quite a bit. So the opening pages setting up the more wartime focus on Scott have me intrigued that that's what he's going to be focusing on for at least the first arc of this book, and kind of, I wouldn't say fixing it, but like maybe sort of expanding it a little bit more, making it a bit more enjoyable to read. What else has me intrigued is what looks like Scott is going up against the Reavers, as up in an old coal mine in British Columbia, the leader of the Reavers, Donald Pierce, gets to work on building his newest creations, lamenting how he had such hope for the first Reavers, but the flesh he used was fickle and lacking, and while the Reavers had hate, they never fully believed like he did, and it's why he made new ones. His big profound speech is interrupted as one of the subjects wants his mother, but Pierce knows that won't be happening, happening as that time has passed, figuring the subject is a failure, so he blows its head off, reminding the remainders that they were all found in the literal gutter and he rescued them from that, only asking for their absolute commitment. It's been a while since I've seen the Reavers, so much so I can't actually remember the last story I actually read them in, but it's an interesting threat for Scott to face, and I wonder if there will be some parallel here with Donald treating the Reavers as soldiers. He wants their absolute commitment, their unwavering loyalty, something that Scott wants as well for the X-Men. He wants them to listen to him as, he's their general to their soldiers, and that's what Donald is to his Reavers. So there's a nice little mirroring going on there, and I'm intrigued to see how Packnadil is going to work with that. One of the Reavers takes a drill to his head, telling Pierce that they will have his absolute commitment. Donald is pleased, getting ready to work on one of them as he decides to call this Reaver Tearjerker. Down in Nebraska at the now destroyed Essex State Home for Foundlings, Scott meets with Robin Hanover, citing how the woman was always kind to him when he was at this place, hence why he is there meeting her now. Scott remembers the time he used to live in the home with his brother Alex, and Robin knew what happened to him and his brother there, and what happened was a crime, and she doesn't know why he was singled out in particular for all of the torture and the punishments. So Packnadil is going back to Scott's past, like a fair way back, as all of this stuff happened in a book that was made in the late 80s, but Scott was a small child when all of this happened, when him and his brother were at this home for kids. Packnadil is using it to gird Scott in his belief and showcase how even being tortured and strict and having that happen to him as a kid, it's kind of made him endure a little bit more, and it didn't break him, and it made him stronger in that case. But I also kind of get the hint that there might be some sort of cycle going on here where, they had all of that sort of strict rules, kind of militaristic sort of doctrine sort of beat into them. And then he's now doing that to the X-Men as well. So there's like that sort of cycle of abuse and trauma happening here where Scott is maybe unknowingly kind of passing that on to the X-Men because of that's what's happened to him. It's a very interesting idea if that's exactly where Packnadil is going with it. And that's what intrigues me about this book so much, is that if he's going in that direction, that's an interesting way to take Scott. It then also retroactively makes the stuff we saw in those early McKay X-Men books that much better, because we have that built in already in the story, and Packnadil is just massaging it and working it in a little bit different way. The one thing I always check when it comes to a new #1 is when a character gets a new run, if it's a writer who uses pre-established story and builds on it, or uses it to inform their own newly created stuff, and if they decide to use it as a base and then build on it and build on that already strong base, or if they just decide we're going to fill it with new OCs and insert them into the character's history. I never like that when that happens. It kind of feels a little cheap, and it's like a writer wanting to put their stamp on the character and kind of force other writers to use their characters a little later on in the run. But Packnadil is using the storied history of Scott to great effect here, which I'm really happy about, and there isn't anything wrong with wanting to make new things and adding new things into established stories. It feels that much more organic to build off of the strong bases already set up over the last few decades and just kind of add little things here and there. Don't destroy the house, you just sort of renovate it a little bit. Robin continues her stories of the old state home and how Scott would never let his brother Alex be put into different homes than him, even leading to him putting 2 orderlies in the hospital from bite and cut wounds. But then she also remembers he also set fire to the East Wing, something Scott flat out does not remember. Robin knows that everyone from those homes has gaps in their memories, things their minds refuse to let them remember because of the trauma. Scott wants to know why Robin is telling him all this, and the woman bursts into tears, telling Scott that she is sick and won't live much longer, so she's seeking Scott's forgiveness since he came to the home full of wildfire and life, and she let the monsters of the house snuff it out. So yeah, I think this is where Packnadil is going to be taking this story, is Cyclops versus the Reavers, and Scott is going to be reclaiming that wildness he once knew. I know there's another younger mutant he's going to be teamed with, so maybe that's, he sees a lot of himself in her or something, and that's what this story is going to be, him sort of learning that, I shouldn't be like this, and kind of breaking that cycle of trauma he has. Speaking of the Reavers, as Scott heads back to base in his Quinjet while talking with Alex over the communications channel, a woman is chased through the Canadian wilderness by two of Pierce's Reavers, who are squabbling amongst themselves, as Tearjerker wants to go at it alone and capture the woman alone, but Sockeye knows he just wants to try and escape again. As they fight and pick up the girl's trail, they also spot Scott's jet flying overhead. Noting that it's a Quinjet, the Reavers panic, thinking the Avengers are coming for them, so Sockeye fires a rocket at the jet. Scott meanwhile has his communications with Alex cut thanks to the mountains in the area, so he loses the call with his brother just as the rocket hits him, causing him to demand manual control over the jet as he tries to bring it down for a safe landing amongst the trees. So I quite like that Scott just seems to have stumbled into this Reaver plot accidentally. Well, not really accidentally, because the Reavers were kind of gung-ho and they, fired without, consulting their leader, which is, again, a really nice mirror with the X-Men just jumping into the battle at the beginning of the issue before listening to Scott. I quite like that mirroring that's happening here. As the jet plummets to the ground, the Reavers tell Pierce what happened, and he is not pleased at all, demanding that they get back to base, telling them to forget about the mutant girl they were trying to recapture for him. Scott meanwhile loses control of the jet even more and is forced to eject as the jet crashes into the woods below, erupting in a giant fireball that spews shrapnel into his parachute, setting it on fire and causing him to plummet fast to the ground. As Scott falls, his head hits on a tree branch and he is knocked out, but also his visor is cracked, and when he briefly wakes up on the ground, he finds the visor is completely broken, and as it shatters, there is nothing left to hold back his powerful concussive blasts, which obliterate a huge chunk of the forest in front of him before he falls unconscious again. A Cyclops who's beaten, broken, bloody, and blind is an interesting way to begin your ongoing, but I'm all for it. I quite like the idea that he has his visor taken away, the control of his eyes is now not under his control anymore. He's effectively blind. So how is he going to navigate a woodland properly and evade the Reavers? It's such a neat survival situation for the character, and I'm intrigued to see what Packnadil is going to do with it, because obviously he's going to team him up with this female mutant that we've seen running around, and it'll be interesting to see how their dynamic works when they're in this survival situation. The Reavers meanwhile see the giant red blast that Scott admits, and Pierce recognizes it, knowing that there is now something far worse in the woods than Avengers, and while he had hoped to train the Reavers up first, this will be their baptism by fire. He tells the cyborgs that Cyclops is in the woods, and if they are lucky, the rest of the X-Men won't be with him or will have died in the crash. We also finally get to see the little team Pierce has been putting together over the course of this issue, as we are introduced to the female Reaver named Blitz Tempo, who is joining Sockeye and Pierce to go and hunt Cyclops. So while the Reavers deploy into the forest, we catch up with the young girl mutant who has escaped the Reavers, and from the way she interacts with animals, I think her powers might be she is able to talk with them or understand them, since she talks to the deer and asks if it knows what the giant red light she saw and the explosions and everything were, and if it can direct her to a Mountie for help. And the deer seemingly understands as it runs off, and the girl is forced to run after it, and it's here she literally trips over the body of Cyclops, the implication being the deer led her to Cyclops. So this is the kind of obvious thing, as I was saying before, the book is going in a very obvious direction where Cyclops is going to be helping this girl. They're going to be in a survival situation out in the woods, trapped off from everyone. They've got to dodge the Reavers and probably other nasties that are hiding out in the woods. So I'm intrigued to see what Packnadil is going to do. I love the sort of stripped down version where it's just Cyclops kind of running around the woods without a team, without his visor. He's got to be, smart and resourceful. I have to imagine the X-Men will get involved in some way. They'll come looking for him or something. But yeah, it's a really cool idea that it's a very pared down book that's doing character work instead of, big flashy action set pieces, which I'm sure we're going to get. We've got a couple in this issue, but I like that Packnadil seems to be focusing on Scott Summers as a character rather than he's a cool guy who shoots optic blasts from his eyes. I like that he's finally focusing on the character. Cyclops issue 1 really surprised me with how new reader friendly it is, especially being that the X books just a few weeks ago came out of a big multi-month event. This issue takes a minute to get going, but when it does, I can see the vision Alex Packnadil has in store for Scott Summers and how he works through his trauma and creates a cycle of trauma. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with the character and what he does with Reavers getting involved in Scott's plot. Some really fun stuff seems to be happening in this book, and I really cannot wait to find out what it is. I'm going to give this issue an 8 out of 10.